Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet and you are watching a new episode of Wojennik TV. America had been attacked. America had been conquered. Well, listening to those few phrases, you all know that we will be talking about science fiction, about things that never happened. I will present you today a review of a game which I had already presented on Wojennik TV, but only while opening this game and showing you the content, the elements. Today, a review of a game published in 2019 by Microgame design group, which is called Live, Free or Die: 3 Battles for America. The game was designed by Kerry Anderson and it is for 2 players aged 16 or higher. The game is in fact 3 scenarios, is in fact 3 games inside one box or inside one bag, which enable you to recreate 3 hypothetical invasions of the USA. The first one is a hypothetical invasion by the Warsaw Pact in an alternate reality in which the Northern Atlantic Treaty had been dissolved and the Warsaw Pact decided to launch an invasion of the continental USA. They managed to secure a bridgehead on Florida and then launched an offensive towards Georgia. This is the first scenario. The second battle, the second game inside this game, is a scenario which depicts a potential invasion from the Mexican border through the Rio Grande River. This will be an offensive launched towards the Texas oil fields, and it will be launched by the Central American Union. The third hypothetical scenario is set in California, in which the Asian alliance comprising North Korea, Vietnam, China launches an offensive towards Los Angeles. So 3 very different battles, 3 very different hypothetical scenarios set somewhere in the 1980s. So we receive 3 games inside one and using components which will be used exclusively for each battle when it comes to the communist forces. The American forces will be used in each scenario. So today I would like to present you this game, tell you how it works, show you how it looks, and at the end I would like to give you my opinion about this title or about those 3 games inside this single title. So let's begin. Here is Live, Free or Die and the map for Southern Discomfort. First of all, I would like to show you the components of this game and briefly explain how it works. First of all, we receive 3 game maps which will enable us to recreate 3 different situations simulating invasion of continental America. The one that you are seeing right now is called Southern Discomfort and it represents the southern part of Georgia with Jacksonville and the northern part of Florida. Now, this scenario is a hypothetical attack by the Warsaw Pact, which was launched from Cuba and which secured a beachhead, a bridgeland on Florida. Then, from this point, a new offensive was launched into southern Georgia. And this offensive comes from 2 ways. First of all, from the land, but secondly, once again, from the sea. So the invading forces of the Warsaw Pact will be both mechanized units or armor units pushing from the southern part of the United States, and also some lighter troops which will be landing on landing crafts and trying to secure new beachland hexes from the sea direction. Now, this is the first map. As you can see, a very interesting map because it enables the use of naval units and at the same time also it enables a push from the land. The second map is also a map which uses naval units. It is called the Asian invasion and it represents Los Angeles and its surroundings. Now here, this is another hypothetical attack which is launched by the Asian coalition, which has for its main purpose to take control of Los Angeles. So here, as you can see, some beach hexes on which the invading forces will be landing. San Diego, some air bases or airfields, and some naval bases or some ports, which will be crucial points which the invading forces will be trying to secure. Lastly, the third map, which enables us to recreate the third hypothetical invasion, will represent a part of Texas with Rio Grande and the wall, and this will be the initial border separating the two forces. From here, from the southern part of the map, the attacking Central American forces will be crossing the river and trying to take control of the oil fields and of the resource centers of Texas, and ultimately also trying to take San Antonio and the Alamo, which is worth a lot of victory points, by the way. So this is an all-land map, a map in which the Mexican and Central American forces will be rushing through the desert and trying to reach San Antonio and occupy the oil fields before the American player can secure them. So three very different maps, showing very different initial positions, different objectives for the invading forces. The terrain effect chart tells you what will be the type of terrain, what will be the movement cost, and what will be the combat influence of such a hex. Additionally, we will have also an information how much different hexes will be worth of victory points. So, for instance, dense urban hexes will be worth 5 victory points. They will be very precious to secure. The same applies to naval bases and air bases, whereas ports or airports will be worth a lot less. So, in general, in all the scenarios, the main objective will be to try to secure the most number of victory points which are calculated at the game's end. The game always lasts 7 turns, unless one of the sides manages to accomplish an automatic victory, which is possible by accomplishing the objectives which are each time described in the scenario. Apart the maps, apart the playing aid, you will be also using counters, and those counters come in a great variety, because first of all you get the American forces, which will be the green counters. Some of them will be used in each scenario, some of them will be used as reinplacements, reinforcements, and the opposing invading forces, which come in 3 sets of counters, which will work very differently. Here you have the Warsaw Pact forces, which are sophisticated, which are mechanized, which use a lot of aircraft, a lot of specialized units such as laser units, cruise missile units, or engineers. And the second adversary will be the Central American coalition, which will be using a lot of mechanized units, because as you have already seen, they will be trying to race through the Texas desert and to reach San Antonio. So we will find a lot of mechanized units, a lot of mechanized infantry, a lot of armor, not a lot of other types of units, but some specialized are also present. The third type of adversary will be the Asian coalition, in which we will have a lot of infantry units, and really a lot of infantry units, because the specialty, the strongest part of the Asian army will be their infantry divisions. Some human wave attacks will be possible, overstacking, attacking with a lot of counters. This will be the landmark of this army. Additionally, we will also be using aircraft units. As you can see, the blue ones will be used for the American player, and the pink ones will be used by the communist player. Those air forces will be used in a different number depending on the scenario. In some of the scenarios you will be choosing your own aircraft, you won't be using all of them. Here in the Southern Discomfort you are using all the counters which are in the game. Now we have several types of aircraft, they will be different, and we have only two information on them. The first one, which is at the top of the counter, indicates how strong such a plane is in aerial combat, whereas the second at the bottom tells us how strong this unit is when supporting ground combat. So some aircraft will be used in order to fight our adversaries' aircraft, whereas others will be used to support our ground forces. We have also the B-2 bomber, which, as you can see, has an asterisk, which tells us that this unit cannot be intercepted. It is a stealth bomber, so it can freely support your units without being afraid that it can be intercepted by opposing aircraft. We will be using additional counters, which will, for instance, indicate hexes on which nuclear attacks took place, where radioactivity is present, or where biological or chemical weapons were used. We will be using counters indicating burning oil, because we'll be able also to put those on fire, and additional ones which will be used to track some statuses. We will be having also some naval units, which will be the landing crafts used to transport units onto the beachheads. We'll have some battleships used by the communists in order to support the invasion. We'll have some laser cruisers or cruise missile cruisers, which will be also supporting the invasion. So, interesting thing, only the communist player has those naval forces. Now, how a turn of Live Free or Die looks like. The game, as I said earlier, can last up to 7 turns, and each of those turns will be played in a very specific way, in accordance to a turn sequence. The first phase, which is played during each turn, will be the communist recovery phase, which is an advanced game phase, because we do have two modes in this game: the basic game and the advanced game. The difference is as follows. In the advanced game, you will be using a lot of additional rules. So you will be using rules governing aircraft, you will be using rules governing nuclear, biological or chemical attacks. You will be using additional units, and I strongly recommend you play the advanced game. If you want to play a basic game just to see how the game works, you should grab the scenario set in Texas, and you should play an introductory basic game, remember the Alamo, using only the basic rules. Then you should jump onto the advanced rule, and I guarantee that this will be a very different and very pleasant experience. Now, so the first phase, as I said earlier, is the aircraft recovery, because each aircraft which is used during your turn can be flown or aborted. It depends on the outcome of its previous mission, and during this phase you can recover flown aircraft. So you can take the aircraft which were flown onto your available box, or if your unit was aborted, you have to verify if it can return rolling a certain number, depending also on the aircraft type. After recovering your aircraft, the communist player will be able to ask for some additional reinforcements. In order to do so, he rolls 2 dice and he has to score doubles. If he does, he can grab this number indicated by one of those dice, the same number of units. So if he rolls 2 threes, he can grab 3 units and add them to his pool. If he rolls 2 ones, he'll get 1 unit. If he rolls not something which is a double but something else, he will get nothing. After such a reinforcement phase, which as you can see can grant the communist player some additional units or grant him nothing, he moves his units. Now the land units have only two parameters, or rather yes, two parameters when it comes to standard units. They will have a strength number and a mobility factor, but as you can see, those units are double-sided, and sometimes we will get a U letter. This U letter indicates that this is an untried unit, and even the owner doesn't know what is its real strength up until the first battle in which such a unit takes place. When it enters in contact with an enemy and when it starts a battle, it is flipped over and you get the real strength, which can vary. It depends on the unit type, so we can expect what you'll receive, but you will always get an information, you will always get a specific value which will be in a very specific range. Some weaker units can have even a 0, which means they will be instantly removed from the game. Some additional units have also one additional information. It will be the range. For instance, artillery units have a range which indicates which is the distance at which such a unit can attack or support his or her own forces. Now, moving is pretty straightforward. You have a certain number of movement points. You can move units single or in stacks, taking into consideration opponents' zones of control, both ground zone of control as aerial zones of control, because aircraft can be used during this phase in order to intervene, in order to impose some restrictions on movement. Now, at any point of this phase, the opposing player can declare that he wants to use an aircraft in order to fly a mission. And he can, for instance, put such a unit into a hex in order to increase, increase the difficulty of moving onto such a hex. But when he does, the opponent has a possibility to react. And at this point, he can decide to launch his own aircraft in order to intercept the flying opposing aircraft. At the same moment, the opposing player can decide to intercept the intercepting aircraft, and so on. So the players will be able to respond to their actions. When they are done, the aerial fights are resolved. Each aircraft has to be decided if they continue their initial mission off or if they want to fight the aerial opponents. If they fight their counterpart, both sides will roll a die, and they will have to score a number equal or less, which indicates that the opposing aircraft will be hit and has to abort. If it doesn't succeed, well, the aircraft can continue its initial mission if we decided that this aircraft decides to continue its initial mission and not fight the aircraft of the opponent. So it is quite interesting because players can respond to the actions of their opponents both during the movement and combat phases by sending their own aircraft. So this is kind of game inside a game. Apart from that, moving is pretty straightforward. One thing deserves to be mentioned, it's the overrun rules. It's the overrun rule, because it is possible to initiate combat during movement, and unlike in many games, here you do not have any negative modifiers for launching such an attack. You just have to spend more movement points in order to initiate such an attack, but you can resolve it just like during the combat phase. So it is possible to dislodge an opposing unit during the movement phase. When the communist player is done with his movements, he resolves his attacks. Attacks are again pretty straightforward. If you have untried units, you flip them in order to see their real strength. You make a sum and you get a ratio by comparing the strengths of both sides. The attacking player has also a possibility to decide to use 2 dice to resolve his combat if the combat is being fought on clear terrain. He might do so in order to increase the probability of receiving a defender retreats result, because those results are pretty much are more often in the down part of the table. So for instance, the 7, which is the theoretically most common result while rolling 2 dice, is the R, which will mean that the defender will be dislodged and it has to retreat. The outcome of the battle will be the elimination of one of the sides. It can be step losses, it can be also an exchange, it can be a retreat. Now, I said step losses, but in this game each unit has only 1 step, so if it is damaged, it is automatically eliminated. Of course, not permanently, because it is possible to return while it is possible to return a unit eliminated in an earlier turn due to the reinforcements which are activated during each phase, during each turn. We do get rules governing advance after combat, retreat, so those are pretty standard rules. You have some additional specialized units which can be used, so you get artillery, you get mobile artillery or coastal artillery which can support combat. You can also launch individual aircraft attacks or use your battleships in order to increase your firepower during combat. After all combats, there is an end phase during which we remove some markers, and then the US player plays his turn in pretty much the same way that the communist player did. The major exception and difference is that the American player gets to roll 3 dice in order to see what type of reinforcements he received in accordance to a table showing you what types of units. If he rolls doubles, he can choose what type of unit he wants to take. He can take an armor unit, or he can take also a specialized unit, for instance engineers or laser units or cruise missile units. Additionally, he rolls also 1 die in order to obtain a certain number of militia units, which are then placed into urban hexes, and those units are pretty strong because they can appear even somewhere on terrains which were controlled by the opponent, but they were left uncontrolled. So those militia units can be then used to occupy such hexes, and those units do not require supply. Because we do trace supply in the game, there is no specific phase to do it. We do it at the beginning of some phases, but it will be relatively easy to trace supply unless you are surrounded by enemy units. Now, after accomplishing all his phases, a turn ends and we play a new turn. Now we have some additional rules governing, for instance, the use of biological, chemical or nuclear weapons. We have rules governing special units such as cruise missile units or laser units which can blind opposing aircraft. What I really like are the nuclear weapon rules, because they indicate that we get a nuclear escalation mode in this game, which means that the first player which decides to use a nuclear weapon gets to use 1 attack with an aircraft or an artillery unit which can launch such an attack. But when he does, his opponent, when deciding to use nuclear weapons, will get 2 attacks. Then if he decides to do so, the first player will again be able to use nuclear weapons, but responding by 4 attacks, then 8, 16, 32 and so on. So those salvos may be spread over 1 or more strikes. Now I like those rules governing the escalation of the use of nuclear weapons, because they are nicely simulating how a real nuclear conflict would look like. At first, the initial attack would be probably a single attack with a single warhead, and then when the decision of using such a weapon would have been taken, well, maybe the opposing side would respond also in a limited way, but then when your opponent decides to do so, you will have to respond, but you will again try to respond in a limited way, etc. So So I like I like this idea because it quite nicely simulates how the real events could have taken place. And that's pretty it when it comes to the basic concepts and when it comes to the elements of Live Free or Die. Now I would like to tell you what I think about this game, what I believe are its strong and a little bit weaker points. Live Free or Die, 3 Battles for America is a game set in an alternate reality. Here, in this scenario, the USA had been invaded, and let's begin this conclusion by a few words about the probability of such a scenario. Was it possible that in the middle of the 1980s the USA were invaded by the communist forces from the Warsaw Pact or from a hypothetical Central American Union or by the communist states of Eastern Asia? Well, I would say that in a scale of 1 to 10 this was something like a 1, something of a 1.5 or 2. So the probability of such a scenario, in my opinion, was almost none. So judging this game based on the probability of such a scenario taking place in real world, I'd say that this is pure science fiction. But this is a war game. This is a game in which we should judge the game based on its mechanics, based on how it is played. So for people who do not like alternate reality or science fiction settings, this will be something of a minus, which they will always take into consideration while deciding if to acquire a game. If this setting is not of such a great importance for you, then Live Free or Die is just a very good game. And I would like to tell you a few words why. First of all, Live Free or Die is not only one game. You receive 3 games inside one. And this is always a nice thing, because we get a lot of games in which we have only one scenario or which have scenarios very similar one to another. Here in Live Free or Die, it's really 3 very different battles for America. So the Southern Discomfort scenario, in which the Warsaw Pact invades Georgia from their Florida beachhead, is totally different than the game set in Los Angeles or than the race set in Texas. This is due to 2 different things. The first aspect is that the 3 maps are totally different. In Southern Discomfort, you have a long shore, you have a city, you have also a lot of land, and you can expect an invasion both from Florida as from the sea. You get some marshes which will require you to maneuver alongside, and the situation is complex. In Los Angeles, the situation is much easier to grasp, because you will be fighting for Los Angeles, and this will be the, well, maybe not only, but the major target for both sides. So the Asian communist forces will land on the beaches, and then they will be trying to seize the city. In Texas, you will be having a race. The Mexican and the Central American forces will be trying to sprint ahead to take control of the oil fields, of the gas facilities, and maybe also take the urban hexes. The Americans will desperately try to stop their advance. So 3 very different games, 3 very different maps. The second aspect, apart the maps, are the armies, because each of those invading armies is very different and it works very different. The Warsaw Pact is very specialized, mechanized, it has a lot of aircrafts, it has some naval units, it has specialized units such as laser units or cruise missile units, whereas the Mexican and Central American forces will be having a lot of quick motorized units. They will have absolutely no infantry, but very fast units which will enable them to achieve their major goal, push ahead and take control of the facilities. In Los Angeles, in the Asian invasion, well, we'll be having lots of infantry, lots of infantry. Those Chinese or North Vietnamese or Korean forces will be trying to overwhelm their American counterpart with their numerical superiority. So those armies work totally different, in a totally different way, and thanks to it, each of those games is very different from the other, and I like it a lot because it increases a lot the replay value of this game. What I really like is the fact that the rules are extremely well written. You absolutely have no doubts how to play the game after reading those rules. No typos, no errors, clear, very well laid text. Additionally, those rules are divided into two parts: the basic rules and the advanced rules. And if you want to learn the basic mechanics, I'll advise to play the Texas scenario, which is, in my opinion, the most easy to play. And then take the advanced rules and play a different scenario using the full set of rules. And this is where the game really shines, because with those additional elements, which are not too complicated, which are not overwhelming, and which do not increase the time to play the game, you get a lot of additional chrome. So great aircraft and air battle rules. So simple, but at the same time giving you so much possibilities to use those additional assets. Naval rules. Nuclear, biological, chemical weapons, laser units, cruise missile units, a lot of additional and very climatic stuff. I definitely recommend you to try the game with those advanced rules. What I really like in this game is the fact that you receive quite a few interesting mechanics. This is not a simple I go, you go game. You have, first of all, the possibility to respond to your opponent's movements by using your assets during two distinctive phases, during the movement and combat phase. So you won't be only sitting and watching what your opponent does, you will be actively responding to some of his moves. You get an interesting overrun tweak where you can still fight during overruns with your full strength. You have an interesting way to construct the CRT, because you get the opportunity to choose to roll 2 dice instead of 1 if the battle is fought in open terrain. You get, as I mentioned earlier, the rules governing biological, chemical and nuclear weapons. You get those specialized units, laser or cruise missile units. You receive the interesting mechanic concerning the untried units, which I really like because it adds a certain dose of uncertainty to the game. Even when you launch an initial assault with some units, you do not have the certitude that this will be enough, and it might not be sufficient, because it can finally appear that the untried units are too weak to pierce through a stronger unit defending a spot. So a lot of interesting small things which make this game quite unique. So what I think are the weaker points of Live Free or Die? I have already said a few words about the sci-fi setting. It might be something which will not appeal to every wargamer. When we talk of this sci-fi setting, if even we assume that those scenarios were possible and the US were invaded by communist forces, I can still not imagine how the USA could not have had some naval powers, some naval forces. You get only communist forces with battleships bombarding American installation on the land. Well, I can't imagine that situation. The naval power of the USA was such great that even in case of a disaster, they would still have something to respond with. Here in this game, you have absolutely nothing. Well, I believe also that one thing a little bothered me. This was the set of rules governing nuclear weapons, because I can't also imagine how the US could use nuclear devices on their own soil without a previous opposing forces attack using the same technology. In my opinion, in this game, for instance, an initial attack using nuclear weapons set in Los Angeles by the American forces is something which would absolutely never take place. In my opinion, the American should be the player who can only respond to nuclear attacks, and at the same time there should be some spaces excluded from using those weapons, because I can't imagine how the USA could launch those nuclear attacks on urban urban hexes where they would bombard their own civilian population. I can't imagine such a scenario. When we speak of the quality of the elements, because it is the last thing that I would like to tell you a few words about. I absolutely have no issue with the quality of the paper maps and with the colors used. They are very functional maps and this is absolutely sufficient to me. But the quality of the counters is something that could have been done a little better. And I do not mean the way that the information had been printed on the counters, because this is crystal clear. I am talking about the quality of the cardboard, because those counters are very difficult to be punched from the counter sheet. You will have to use a knife or you will have to round the corners. If you don't, those counters stacked on small hexes will be very difficult to use, and at the same time it will be not very pleasant to look at them. It will not be very pretty, because in my opinion they were not sufficiently laser cut. They should have been cut a little better. So use a knife or round the counters just as I did with my copy. Apart from this, no additional complaints concerning quality. I have also already said that the rules and the rulebook is extremely good, and all the additional elements that you will be using are very functional. So, concluding, Live Free or Die, 3 Battles for America is a game set in a science fiction reality, in an alternate reality in which the US were invaded. A very interesting game with a great dynamic, a game in which you receive 3 very different scenarios using 3 different armies, opposing armies, which will try to overcome the American forces. A game which has some interesting rules, some interesting elements and a lot of chrome. At the same time, not very difficult to learn, and which enables us to play a game in 1 hour and a half, 2 hours, so it is a very accessible title. If you have the opportunity, grab this game because it is just very interesting. This was a review of Live Free or Die, 3 Battles for America, published by Microgame Design Group. Thank you a lot for watching this video. I wish you a fantastic day and see you next time.